Today, I'm going to give you some tips on how to build good-looking starter houses using materials found only in the forest biome. Greetings friends, Khaios here. I've been reading the comments on the videos that I've put out since my return, and I've seen quite a few people asking for more building guides, especially for low-budget starter houses. So today I'm going to show you a couple of ways you can make good-looking houses using only the materials that you could find and craft at the spawn forest. No bosses, NPCs, or paint needed. But first, sadly our plushie campaign did not meet its funding goal, so to all of the amazing people who pre-ordered one, you should be receiving refunds soon if you haven't already. If you would still like to help support the channel, however, I would recommend checking out my Patreon page linked below. I offer various rewards for your pledge, ranging from access to my Discord server, a peek at my video schedule, and even larger rewards like all of my world saves, or me thanking you personally at the end of every video. With ad revenue as inconsistent as it is, Patreon is a huge help for me and the channel, so to everybody who does drop their support, and to everybody who has already been supporting there, I give a huge thank you. Now, onto the tutorial. For starter houses, obviously we want to keep functionality in mind, but that doesn't mean that we have to sacrifice appearance. And we can absolutely make good looking houses with what we have to work with just in the spawn forest. What exactly do we have available? In terms of raw materials, we have easy access to wood, dirt, stone, and clay. If you want to do some digging, you'll find some copper, tin, lead, or iron. Grass and vines can be used with some patience as long as you have left some grass in your forest biome to grow with. The spawn forest will almost always have a cave connected to it, but I'm only going to be counting surface materials for this video. Anything from the underground and cavern, I'm not even going to include. Even still, you can find chests in the mouth of that cave, which will have some goodies to work with. If you're extremely lucky, the cave in your world may have enough cobwebs in it to make some furniture. This will be more likely in larger worlds than smaller worlds. Wait, I'm not gonna count it. I mean, the surface is literally right here, but that's underground, right? I'm not including in the video. That would add way more statues. Nope, nope, nope. Moving on. The forest has plants that grow naturally in it, including sunflowers and a few different dye plants. If you happen to be playing during Halloween, you'll have access to pumpkin blocks without needing to visit the dryad. And if you're lucky, the trees that spawn might drop the living wood wand or leaf ones for you. Slimes readily spawn in the biome, so we have their gel to work with as well. And don't forget that we can get gravestones by letting those slimes teach us a lesson, or repeatedly slaughtering the guide if you're in hardcore. The graveyard biome will open up a lot of cheap crafting options. Then on top of all of that, there are a lot of different blocks and walls that you can craft from those materials. There's a surprising number of items that we have to work with. These chests have every item that you can get without leaving the spawn forest, and it's with these items we will be building. The last chest is technically obtainable, but for the most part you'd have to be pretty insane or extremely lucky to get these in survival without leaving the forest. But as you can see, we have an abundance of materials to work with at spawn. So now that we know what materials we have to work with, let's get going on the houses themselves. Usually I see people do two types of starter houses, boxes or underground. So today I'm going to do one surface house with only the cheapest materials used, one underground house with common crafted materials, and one final surface house that has some of the harder and more rare materials in it. The goal today is to give you ideas on how you can make decent looking houses with the cheapest of materials. We'll be starting with the most simplistic of the three. Just because this house is more simple in terms of materials doesn't mean it is the easier house to make look good. If anything, the extreme limitations on items that we use can make it more difficult to design. For this house, I will only be using wood, dirt, and stone. Additionally, this house will only have items in it that can be crafted just straight from my inventory or a workbench, nothing else. When building a house as limited in materials as this, it's important to give interest in the form of shape. One easy way to do this, which I do in most of my builds, is by adding a false foundation underneath the build. The goal there is to make it look like the landscape next to the house is on a hill that's dipping down beneath the house, so that part of the house's foundation is exposed, just to make the area look a little bit more interesting. At first, due to limited materials, I went with dirt wall, but I decided to change it to stone wall with some wood wall and wood platforms in the end. The obvious choice for the inside of our little box is to fill the interior with wood wall. I don't want the walls to stick out past the edges of the building, so wooden fence is placed at the entrances. To make the interior a little bit more interesting, I recommend using a couple of different walls for accent strips, which I did at the top and the bottom of the house with a line of stone wall. I also like to add an accent at the ceiling to vary the texture even more, so I used a line of wood platforms and stone blocks on top of them. When it comes to rooftops, you could go for a more modern look and leave it flat, but with the limited materials that we have, I feel that edges too close to the dreaded wooden box house, so for this example, I'm going with an A-frame roof. Instead of using solid blocks, which would blend too much in with the rest of the house, you could try using platforms like I did here. You can even embellish them by adding a couple of extra platform bits on the inside segments. Some wood fences along the top add a nice detail to the roof. I wanted to add darker edges along the rim of the rooftop, so I used stone wall beneath every platform, and then I filled the rest of the roof in with wood wall, as that is the only material that makes sense to me here. I also left a gap of space between the wood walls and the stone walls because I like the added texture that's made between them when they overlap rather than combined together. Now, the rooftop is perfectly fine like this, and I rather like it, but if you wanted to, you can continue to develop the area even more to make the house look a little bit more interesting. It could be anything that you'd like in this area, but I went with lines of wood block and I continued with the platform pattern throughout the entire ceiling. With the roof complete, now's time to add windows and furniture. We don't have sand for these builds, so our windows will either be just empty spaces or fences. Glass will not be an option. Fences are a bit safer as they prevent enemies from spawning inside of the house, but you could still have a valid NPC house with gaps in the wall as long as those gaps are less than 5 tiles in space. Since this house is pretty small but kind of tall, I wanted to have narrow yet high windows made out of wooden fence. It feels like the perfect amount of window to wall ratio for this style of house. Furniture is the easiest part of this build due to our current limitations. We have wooden doors, workbench, table, and chairs. On top of the workbench and table, I place a few piles of silver coins, as those should be easy enough to obtain from a few slime spawns. I even added an armor statue, as all you need to craft that is a handful of stone block at the workbench. For light sources, you could just go with torches, but I thought that using tiki torches as a form of lamp looked nicer, and since I placed them right behind the doors, it even helps make the house a little bit more safe from zombies during a blood moon. Lastly, I added a couple of rows of wooden fence outside of the house to tie everything together and make it feel more comfy. To get the little ball shape over the fences, simply place one more wooden fence over the other one and the shape will appear. And with that, the most simplistic material house is complete. For being a blend of stone, wood, and dirt, I think it came out rather nice. But as I said earlier in the video, this isn't even a fraction of what we can accomplish just within the spawn forest biome alone. So let's move on to making an underground style house using more of the available materials. By the way, did you know that I'm on TikTok now? I recently created an account over there at the suggestion of Chippy Gaming, and we've already hit 100 followers at the time of this announcement. I'm currently in the process of uploading my old YouTube shorts onto that platform, but once that's done, I will be returning to releasing fresh, short content. If you like my short form videos, I will still be posting them here on YouTube, but I will be posting slightly different versions of them over on TikTok as well, for those of you who prefer watching short videos over there. I'm hoping to hit 1,000 followers on TikTok by the end of the month, and if you already use TikTok, I would greatly appreciate it if you'd swing by and help us reach that goal. If your world has a large hill near spawn, you can easily use it for this next style of house. It's easier to reshape a hill to your liking than to build one from scratch, but in my case, my built-up world doesn't have a hill here, so I'll be building mine from the ground up. I recommend running a tunnel through the bottom of your hill from one side to the other. This will allow you to easily get from one side of the hill to the other without having to parkour your way over the whole thing. Then to make the cave more realistic, I'd suggest placing stone along the floor and ceiling of that tunnel. I know it's not really a factor in Terraria, but stone looks like it would support the hill much better than dirt would, and I personally like adding little nods to reality in my builds like that. You can even replace the background walls with stone walls, or even better, since we can get a graveyard biome without ever leaving the spawn forest, you can use any of the other types of stone walls. For this example, I'm using a blend of craggy stone wall and worn stone wall. You may not need to do this part, but since I'm using a handmade hill, I need to get grass on top of that hill, so now's a good time to showcase a way to do this. Just make a line of dirt connecting from your grass in the forest to the dirt where you want the grass to grow, and then wait. You can set it to cook while you head underground and explore, or go AFK to make some food. Of course, it would be a lot more simplistic to just go find the Staff of Regrowth, but I just wanted to show the kinds of builds that we can do without ever leaving this forest. Once you have the grass and vines to your liking, I suggest laying out the orientation of your rooms inside of the hill. I'm using team blocks solely for a visual aid here. None of this is going to remain in the final build. I just wanted to make it easier for y'all to see. The same goes for the illuminate coating that I'm using on top of it. So depending on the size of your hill, you may have room for multiple houses. I love having multi-layered houses in underground builds like this, so I'm going to put one room on the inside of the tunnel, one in a basement beneath it, and two up above it. I'm going to expand the hilltop a little bit to cover the two higher rooms, but this gives me a fun opportunity. Underground houses can be a bit bland to look at since you're basically just building shoeboxes again, but by varying their orientation and making the landscape around them look more interesting, it heightens the overall look of the house. Because the top floor of this house is now built into a cliffside, the house is peeking out of the side of the hill, which is always a fun thing to do. It adds a little bit more flavor to the build. I could even include a window on that house later on in the game once I have glass, if I wanted to. It just adds a bit more visual spice to the build. You could go so far as having a rooftop poking out of the top of the hill, or even the entire top room just sitting on there like a house. But I'm going to leave mine like this, so I need to make the hill look even more interesting. To do that, I'm going to hollow out segments of the hill on the inside of it around the house. In the segments below the house, this is going to serve as the false foundation, but on the tops and sides of the house, it's going to add additional area to decorate with using grass and vines to make the area a bit more interesting. In the parts beneath the house, I use stone slab and gray brick walls for the house's foundation, and then for the rest of the holes, I either use a blend of stone walls or the dirt walls that have been crafted from a graveyard biome. In this case, I use wavy dirt wall. Now to bring some life to the hill. If you understand the spawn rules of trees, you can carefully manipulate the terrain around the hill to plant several trees on top of it. While you can get poo block without ever leaving the forest, sadly you cannot get the bone block needed to make fertilizer. So if you're wanting to plant trees on top of or around your hill house, you'll need to do what I'm doing now and just go the old-fashioned way and wait it out. Just remember that an acorn can only grow a tree if it has 2 blocks of grass on the left, 2 blocks of grass on the right, and those blocks are all level with the block that the acorn is planted on. You can always adjust the terrain to get the land closer or further away from a tree after it's grown. And now I'm finally happy with the hill. That's right, I spent all of that time just making the hill look good, because remember, it's a part of the house too, and especially in this style of house, I think it's more important to make the landscape look good rather than the interior, as it takes up the majority of what you see. At any rate, now it's time to work on the interior of the house. In the basement, I use a row of stone accent slab beneath a row of normal stone slab for the floor. They look identical, but they do not blend together, which is an important detail for this style of flooring. If you're not sure how to get the accent slabs, you craft them at a heavy workbench with some stone in a graveyard biome. I like my basements to be primarily made out of stone in most cases, so the walls are going to be made out of gray brick. On the next floor up, I use stone accent slabs at the very bottom of the floors with a line of wood on top of them. The accent slab doesn't blend with wood, giving the wood a nice defining line. I place the normal stone slab where the doors are going to be, and then to the right side of it I place a line of gray brick that kind of serves as the rooftop of the basement along the cave's floor that makes it look man-made, but it still blends nicely with the stone around it. Since this room is still one of the lower floors of the house, I'm going to keep with the gray stone side walls. For the 2 upper rooms, I'm keeping the same floor design, but I want to bring a splash of color to the build, especially since one wall is exposed to the outside. Since we have access to clay and a furnace, I'm going to use red brick for the side walls. Stone accent slabs and gray brick will make up the ceilings of these rooms, and already the house is looking much more complete. Now onto the background walls, starting once again with the basement, where I primarily use gray brick wall to match the side walls. At the bottom of the basement, I use planked wall in a line with a row of stone slab above it, and I do the same thing with the walls on the next floor up, as that is still within the stone area of this house. For the top 2 floors, I wanted to bring a more wooden look in, so I kept using the same pattern as the bottom floors, but I replaced the planked wall with red brick wall, and I replaced the gray brick wall with wood wall. And now it's time to decorate. When it comes to decorating this house, this is going to vary wildly from person to person, depending on what your preferences and needs are. Some people like having a bed on the ground level so that they can recall to the bed and run out of the house easily. Personally, I like having my bed on a higher level so that if I recall or die while I'm AFK, I don't somehow end up in a death loop when the guide inevitably lets a zombie into the house at night. You may want storage in the same room as your bed. I like mine in the basement or attic. There are no right or wrong answers here, so I'm just going to give you an example of what you can do in terms of decoration without ever leaving the forest biome. One thing I can also recommend when having several box-shaped rooms like this is to slightly break up the boxiness of that shape. A simple sloped block in the corners of the rooms will go a very long way in making them look less shoeboxy. As for the decorations, there are actually quite a lot of options to work with at this stage in the game if you're willing to put in a little elbow grease. This house has some materials that you'll have to poke around in the ground to dig up a bit, such as lead or iron, but it doesn't use anything extremely rare or difficult to obtain. That is going to be saved for our next house design. For now, this is the underground hill house style complete, and an example of what you might have to work with in the forest biome while crafting. If you're enjoying this video and you're finding the guide helpful, please consider subscribing to the channel. Lately, YouTube has begun another new wave of their subscriber purges that they do a few times a year, so it'd really help the channel out if you joined our community by subbing yourself and clicking the bell to turn on all notifications. Thank you very much. Now it is time for the final house design. This one is going to use some materials that are much harder to obtain, but are still technically obtainable without ever leaving the forest biome, so I feel like it's only fair to include them in today's video. You may get some of the rare materials easily with luck, others are going to be much more difficult, and some will take a ton of grinding, but still all of these are possible. And even without some of the more difficult or rare items, this house style will still be doable and will still look interesting with other materials that you use instead. So let's jump straight in. For this design, I'm going to be making a witch's hut on stilts. The first rare item that I'm using is the wood wand. Shaking trees has a chance of dropping this at a rate of 0.3%. Of course, you'll most certainly be able to find one of these towards the edges of the world inside of a living tree, but it is still obtainable without ever leaving the starting forest. I've seen it drop on the first shake of a tree, so it is entirely up to luck. This will make up the majority of the house, including the stilts and the witch hat shaped roof. The floor of the hut is made with stone accent slab and iron brick under the doorways, with gray brick making up the top side of the floor. Wood platforms are placed beneath the floor for added texture, and a row of iron brick connects each of the stilts to give them the appearance of extra support. Wood walls and sloped iron bricks are placed at the bottom edges of the house's floor to make it a little bit more interesting with the shape. For the interior walls, I went primarily with wood wall. Gray brick and stone slab line the bottom of the floor, while wrought iron fence and iron brick make up a giant teardrop-shaped window and its frame. Now for the next rare material, the leaf wand. This is found the same way as the living wood wand. Because the chances of getting both of these wands in this way are very slim, I just use a tiny bit of leaves here and there to give the appearance of moss in the house to give you an idea of what you can do, but I didn't want it to make it too impactful, so there will be virtually no difference without it. I just wanted it there as an example. Since dirt and living wood blocks blend together, I place patches of dirt within the rooftop. I'm going to bridge grass up from the ground all the way up to those dirt patches to give them a splash of color along the roof and to allow grass and vines to grow from them, further enhancing the look of the house. The next rare item to enter this build is going to be poo block, because I really want to have little flies buzzing around the place. Apples, peaches, apricots, grapefruits, and lemons can all drop from shaking trees at around a 5.4% drop rate, so it shouldn't be too difficult to get some amount of food. Crafting a toilet isn't difficult either, as long as you get a little bit of iron or lead, and since we are using only a few blocks of poo for this build, it should be perfectly doable if you want to do this. I also think that the block makes this build feel like it's caked in mud. This house would definitely fit in a swamp, and I kind of wish there was a swamp biome in the game, but let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me build one myself. With the house structurally complete, it's time to move on to the decorations. Blueberries grow pretty commonly in the forest biome, so you shouldn't have too difficult a time getting a couple to throw in here or there. The next item, however, you will only get if you are absolutely insane. This is an angry dandelion banner, which would require you having a lot of windy days and a lot of luck in spawning these little guys in, but the banner looks amazing in this build, so I couldn't help but include it just for the rare material house. Once again, for decorating the interior, this is going to be entirely up to the player and what they want for their build. There are no right or wrong answers here. The fishing crate is obtainable without leaving the forest biome in some cases, but it's going to take some lucky stars lining up. You'll need a sizable pool of water, which is more likely on larger worlds than smaller ones. The fishing pole, that's easy to get, but the bait will not be. Since we can't get a net without talking to NPCs, you would need to find a can of worms in a nearby chest, then just hope to catch a crate pretty early. Then again, you won't be restricted to staying in the forest biome and not talking to NPCs like I am for this video, so it's hard to say if you would call this a starter item or not. I would consider it very early progression. Since October just ended, there's a good chance that your world has some pumpkin in it, so I'm going to include a jack-o'-lantern in the build as well, though you can purchase pumpkin seeds from a dryad at any time of year. I finish off the build with some crates, a cooking pot, and a pile of gold, which shouldn't be too hard to get early game, and a plate with an apple on it, because every witch worth her weight has a poisoned apple handy. And the final starter house is complete. I didn't even go as crazy as I could with the rare materials. I wanted to leave the build a little bit more realistic for anybody to draw inspiration from for their starter houses. And I hope you all have enjoyed this starter house build tip video. If you did, be sure to leave a like and a comment letting me know what build tips you would like to see in the future, and please subscribe to help tell the YouTube algorithm that you would like to see more of my content. Be sure to swing by my Patreon if you'd like to help support the channel, and I wanted to give a huge thank you to my biggest supporters for the month. Hypic3, Sarcasm Not Intended, and Vaultec Rep 77. And be sure to check out my channel artist MythicalWater linked in the description below. Thank you all very much for watching. Be back soon with a new video.